And we are starting to see the effects of tariffs on inflation and the prices that you pay at the grocery store, gas pump, and more. Let's take a look at some of those numbers and how much you're paying. Last month, inflation rose 0.3% to 2.7%, and that is the highest level since February. And you may be noticing that increase in your grocery bill as well. Food prices are up, and here are some of the biggest jumps. Things like instant coffee, oranges and tangerines, and peanut butter. Gas prices also increased last month. We're paying 16 cents more to fill up in July than we did in June, and it will cost you about $3.27 per gallon right now. But car prices, well, they did drop a bit. So to put all of this in context, we're joined now by Professor Michael Greiner from the Oakland University School of Business. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So let's start with inflation and prices. I think all of us, when we go to the grocery store, we notice that the prices are ticking up ever so slightly, but it's consistent. What are your thoughts on where we kind of stand when it comes to tariffs and its impact with inflation?
Well, frankly, this is quite disturbing. This is quite a change from what we've been seeing really since the that height of inflation that we had after the pandemic recession. Since then, we've seen a steady decrease in the inflation rate, pretty much going down almost nonstop. There was one brief tick up about a year ago, but other than that, things have been pretty much steadily trending downwards. And this is the first time that we start to see that trend turn around. And if we see this continuing for more than 1 month, then I think that we could be in for a really rough next couple of months.
Now, we did go through a list of some of the items that we're already starting to see those increases, but where are you noticing some of the jumps?
Well, the biggest one for me that really jumped out is if you look at appliances and household furniture, that type of thing, because those are two items that really are deeply impacted by tariffs. And so I think what we're seeing here really is the impact of the tariffs, really nothing else that can explain that.
On that note, because we were talking about some of the grocery items where we're seeing that increase go up, everyone's talking about tomatoes these days.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's one area where it seems like we're getting into a bit of a tomato war with Mexico. And that's the problem here, is that these tariffs really don't help us with the overall trade deficit. That comes down to a question of how much investment there is relative to our savings, which that's the story for another day. But you can kind of look at its impact at specific industries. And right now, we're going to see the price of tomatoes going up at the department store simply because of the fact that people have decided that this is something we're going to put tariffs on.
That was a longstanding agreement that the president wants to get out of. And, just to push back a little bit, his argument is that it will boost domestic production, specifically talking about Florida. What are your thoughts on that when tariffs go in, increase the price for something that we're importing to potentially then put the focus on domestic production?
Well, there is something to be said for that. I mean, the problem with tariffs, and this could be seen as an advantage in some cases, is that it produces winners and losers. There is the potential that, for example, tomato growers in Florida could be positively impacted by this. But the reason that they're positively impacted by this is that they can charge more for their tomatoes without fear of their prices being undercut essentially by foreign competition. And what that means then is the losers are going to be the consumers who want to buy more tomatoes.
That's a really good point. And I think this is why these discussions are so important, because so much information is getting thrown at us. And of course, you want to support, folks who are working domestically. But you're right. If you don't have competition, then you need a healthy dose.
That's exactly right. And that's really what trade is all about in a lot of ways, which is allowing each country do what it does best and most efficiently. The United States actually exports a lot of stuff and a lot of services, really. I mean, that's where our strength is. And what we do is we import things that we're not so good at producing. So inevitably, if we restrict those things from coming in, people are going to be paying higher prices for them at home.
Now, Professor, I love this conversation, and I actually want to dig deeper into some other issues. So viewers, don't go anywhere, because we are talking about saving money based on vibes. What's that all about? That's coming up in 90 seconds. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Local 4 Live. We are talking about money and inflation with Oakland University, and we do want to dive into a different topic. Many people are changing how they save money because they are worried about the economy, and they're taking part of a new trend called revenge saving, where people save more instead of spending a lot. I would just call that underconsumption. In other words, younger generations are adjusting financial habits based on feelings about the economy, regardless of whether their financial situation has changed. A new survey from Credit Karma says 44% of Gen Zers and millennials engage in so-called vibe-based budgeting, meaning they are buying or saving based on feelings and emotions. Both generations, of course, worried about rising prices and a possible recession. We do want to bring back in Professor Michael Greiner from the Oakland University School of Business. What do you make of this vibe savings?
Yeah, the reality is that economics is very much linked to psychology, and that's what we're seeing again. Which is that when people are afraid, they're going to spend less. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of the business. And we see that in a lot of things. Like, for example, inflation is very much driven by people's own emotions. If you think that things are going to cost more, then that allows businesses to raise prices more. Similarly, there's kind of this idea that at the same time, if people pull back on spending, then that can hurt the economy overall. So in some respects, almost the best thing people can do to help the economy is to spend more, but on each individual person's basis, the rational decision then is to spend less when things aren't looking so good.
I think a lot of times millennials and Gen Zers get a bad rap, but in this case, it sounds like they're saving more money just because they're uncertain of the future. That sounds kind of smart.
That is kind of smart. And the irony here is that overall, that's actually been kind of a shortcoming of the U.S. economy. Part of the reason that we have this huge trade deficit overall, as I mentioned earlier, is because of this gap between the amount of savings and the amount of investment we have in the United States. We have a huge amount of investment in the United States. In fact, we're world leading for the amount of investment we have, which is wonderful. But we really don't save as much as we should. And so if individuals actually start saving, then that could be something that positively impacts the economy overall.
It's interesting as you get older and you go through a few recessions and you see a downturn and then you see an upswing, you start to see some patterns playing out. In your experience, of course, you're the expert here. When you look at the trends and kind of where we're heading, do you see any, light at the end of the tunnel here for folks who are worried?
Well, I'm very concerned about things. And I'll tell you, my biggest concern is this constantly changing policy that we have. As I described to my students, the biggest challenge that businesses have, and I hear this from business people all the time lately, is uncertainty and risk. The fact that they don't know what the tariffs are going to be from one time to another, it means that they can't build it into their prices and kind of build into their expectations. And until that gets resolved, then I think that we're going to really be on the downslope with the economy for some time.
So what I take away is that light is either dim or just flickering off in the distance there. We don't really know what's to come. I've been talking to auto industry experts as well when we were looking at the auto industry, especially when the president was first inaugurated. And, one thing they were talking about was consumer confidence, and that these things, it takes a little bit of time, and that consumer confidence can actually dictate and influence the price of cars, like whether people are buying or not. Do you think when people are holding back in this way, there's a ripple effect down the road?
Oh, there absolutely is. And you make a good point here about consumer confidence, because actually consumer confidence as of today is lower than at any point that it's been since basically right after the COVID recession, which really says something.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's so low is indicated by the fact that people are buying less of these kind of big ticket items like vehicles. And I think that that's actually, ironically, part of what we saw in this inflation report, which is that vehicle prices have gone down. I think part of the reason for that is the fact that basically people are saying, hey, we aren't in a position to purchase vehicles right now. So actually the automakers are lowering their prices to meet that demand.
So what would your advice be then to folks who are clearly paying attention, aware of how uncertain times are? What would your advice be to them?
Well, actually, I think there's something to be said for this vibe-based budgeting. If you're concerned about the way the economy is going, it makes sense to save some money and make sure that you have that cushion available to you, because, you never know when you might need that.
Yeah, and a vibe check, trust your gut. Maybe there's a good life lesson here as well.
For sure.
All right, thanks so much, Professor.